Ever heard of a Silver King? I mean, not some character in, Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings or whatever.
Right.
I'm talking about like a real person.
Mhm.
A guy who made millions from silver mines way back in the 19th century.
Mm.
Like seriously rich.
Oh, yeah, those guys were the real deal.
Today we're diving into the life of one of those Silver Kings,
Mm.
James G. Fair.
Interesting.
This guy went from being a penniless Irish immigrant
Wow.
to one of the wealthiest men in all of America.
That's the American dream right there.
He was actually alive at the same time as Levi Strauss.
Oh, wow, really?
You know, the jeans guy.
Yeah, of course.
And like, Strauss Fair's story is a wild ride through the booms and busts of the gold rush era.
I bet. You know what I think is so interesting about Fair's story? It really shows just how complicated the Gilded Age was.
Yeah.
I mean, here's this guy. He's an immigrant, a really smart businessman, a politician even. But he was also, well, he was
Yeah.
also a really flawed person.
Yeah.
He left behind a ton of family drama and this whole contested will thing that took decades to sort out.
Thing's messy.
Oh, it was. It was a mess.
So for this deep dive, we've got a whole stack of sources.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
We've got a biography,
Mhm.
old newspaper articles,
Mhm.
and even court records from his divorce.
His divorce.
Oh, yeah, it was a big scandal.
We're trying to paint the full picture here. The good, the bad.
And the ugly.
And the downright scandalous. Exactly.
You know, I think it's important to understand not just what Fair accomplished, but how he did it.
Okay.
His methods, his personality, they make you think about the price of success, and about the ethical boundaries that were, let's just say, a bit more fluid back then.
All right, so let's go back to the beginning.
Okay.
Fair came to America when he was only 12 years old, worked his way through school, and then, like so many others, got swept up in the California gold rush.
It was such a crazy time.
It was. But unlike some of the other guys who got rich, Fair didn't find success right away.
He tried all sorts of things. Placer mining, quartz mining, even farming for a bit.
Interesting.
He just kept trying different things, looking for the right opportunity. He had this tenacity that I think a lot of people listening can relate to.
Definitely. Trying to find the right path. I get that.
It's a good reminder that success is rarely a straight line.
Yeah.
It's more like a winding road with a lot of twists and turns.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to realize that a path isn't working out and be brave enough to try something new.
Absolutely.
And for Fair, that something new was silver.
Silver.
Yep. He moved to Virginia City, Nevada, and spent years learning everything about the silver mining business. He became known for working incredibly hard, almost obsessive about the details.
I see.
You could say he was a bit of a control freak.
Right. Well, I'd say he was very hands-on. Like, he insisted on inspecting the mines himself every single day. He wrote every single company check.
Okay.
And he looked over every single expense report. I mean, was he a micromanager? Or was that, like, the secret to his success?
Good question.
I'll let you decide on that one.
Okay, so he was a guy who liked to be in charge. That's pretty clear. But it's one thing to be organized and work hard. It's another to get super rich.
Mm-hmm.
So how did Fair go from hardworking miner to Silver King?
Well, that's where the big bonanza comes in. That was the discovery that changed everything for Fair and his partners.
Okay.
He partnered up with these guys, John Mackay, James Flood, and William O'Brien, and they became known as the Silver Kings. Together, they bought controlling interests in this mine everyone thought was tapped out, consolidated Virginia, and then, bam, they hit this huge silver vein, the biggest anyone had ever seen.
I can only imagine the shockwaves it sent through the whole mining world. Talk about being in the right place at the right time.
Right. Or was it more than just luck?
That's what I was thinking.
Because here's where things get a little ethically, or let's just say murky, even for back then.
How so?
So before news of the bonanza got out, Fair and his partners, they bought up as much stock in the mine as they could. I mean, that kind of move would get you in huge trouble today. But back then, it was just considered smart business.
That's pretty wild, even for the 19th century. But I guess it does show how cutthroat the mining industry was and the lengths people would go to make their fortune.
Oh, definitely.
Okay, so now Fair is at the top of his game. Rich, powerful, and right in the middle of a huge controversy. What's a guy like Fair to do next?
Oh, what does he do?
He decides to jump into politics.
Well, of course he does.
Yep. In 1881, Fair wins a seat in the U.S. Senate.
But here's the thing. He didn't seem to enjoy it very much.
Really?
Can you imagine that? A senator who hates being in the Senate.
It's kind of funny when you think about it.
It is, but it makes you wonder, why did he even run if he didn't care about the job?
Right. It's a real head scratcher. Some people say he was bored by how slow everything moved in government.
I can see that.
Others think he was more interested in using his political influence to help his own businesses. That makes sense.
There's even this quote where he says that all those Senate discussions about fair wages were boring to him.
Sounds about right. Typical Fair.
Yeah.
All business, no time for all the other stuff.
Exactly. He was definitely a man of action, not words. But all that impatience, that sharp tongue, that would come back to bite him, and in a very public way.
So last time we were talking about Fair and how he ended up a U.S. senator, but he didn't really seem to like it that much.
Nope, not really his thing.
And now we're going to see how his personal life just blew up and became this huge public spectacle.
Yeah, in 1883, his wife Teresa filed for divorce.
After how long were they married?
22 years. And the grounds for divorce?
What was it?
Habitual adultery.
Oh, wow. I bet that caused quite a stir.
Oh, yeah. It was a massive scandal. I mean, think about it. This is a sitting U.S. senator. Never happened before. It was the first time in American history.
Divorce wasn't that common back then, was it?
Not at all. It was a huge deal. There was a real social stigma around it. But you know what's really interesting? Teresa's lawyers, they used the scandal to their advantage.
How so?
They made Fair out to be this heartless womanizer, totally neglecting his family, neglecting his responsibilities.
So it wasn't just about him cheating.
No, it was about showing what kind of person Fair really was, challenging his whole image as this self-made man.
That's interesting.
And let me tell you, the details of the case, they were juicy. Even by today's standards, we've got the court records, testimony from Fair's mistresses. The judge was super harsh on him.
What about Teresa? Did she get anything?
Oh, yeah. Teresa walked away with a record-breaking $5 million settlement.
$5 million?
Yeah.
Back in the 1880s.
Can you imagine? That's an insane amount of money for that time. I mean, what kind of message do you think Teresa was sending with that?
It had to be a huge blow to Fair. For his wallet and his reputation.
Oh, it absolutely was, that
Yeah.
settlement. It was basically Teresa saying, I'm not going to be quiet and you can't just brush me aside. It was about her worth and about challenging Fair's power.
So here we see Fair's carefully crafted image starting to crumple. He's used to getting his way, right? Being in control. But this time he loses. And everyone sees it happen.
Exactly. And remember, this was also when investigative journalism was taking off. Newspapers were digging into the lives of these rich businessmen, exposing all their dirty secrets, all the corruption.
So not only was Fair dealing with this very public divorce, but now the public is starting to question how he made his fortune in the first place.
Exactly. And how do you think Fair reacts to all of this?
I'm guessing not well.
Not well at all. Instead of saying he's sorry or taking responsibility, he just lashes out at everyone. In the newspapers, he comes across as this arrogant jerk who's totally out of touch.
It's like he's doubling down on this me against the world attitude.
Yeah.
But instead of people feeling sorry for him, he just pushes them away.
Yeah, even the people who were once on his side.
And this all affects his family too, right?
Oh, yeah. The divorce wrecked his business partnerships. Two of his closest partners, Mackay and Flood, they sided with Teresa.
I mean, can you blame them after the way Fair was acting?
No, not really. But for Fair, it was devastating. He lost his wife and his business partners. It was a real turning point for him. He became more and more isolated. He didn't talk to his daughters, and he had a hard time connecting with his sons, who were both dealing with alcoholism.
It's really sad. It shows that all the money and success in the world doesn't mean you'll be happy or that your family will be okay. It seems like Fair's focus on getting rich actually destroyed his family.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And this theme of loneliness and broken relationships, it keeps going, even after Fair leaves the Senate and goes back to San Francisco.
What did he do there?
He got into real estate, bought tons of property all over the city.
So from Silver King to real estate tycoon, this guy could never start making money.
No, but this time his reputation takes another hit. He gets known as this terrible landlord.
A slum.
Yep. He neglected his properties, refused to fix anything.
What was his excuse?
Oh, he always complained about the high taxes. So that was why he couldn't afford to take care of the buildings.
We've all had bad landlords, haven't we?
Oh, yeah, for sure. But when you're a multimillionaire and you're still pinching pennies, it makes you wonder what's really going on.
It really does. What were his priorities? What did he actually care about? Was he just greedy? Or was there something else going on, some deeper insecurity that made him hoard all this wealth?
Good questions. It's like he couldn't escape his past, that fear of being poor again, like when he first came to America. Even with all that money, he still felt like he had to protect it at any cost. And that fear, those ghosts from his past, they would come back to haunt him in a really spectacular way. When Fair died in 1894, he left behind $40 million. But there was a problem. His will, it vanished. Gone. All that was left was a blank piece of paper.
Wait a minute. The will disappeared. It sounds like a mystery novel.
It really does. And that's where all this legal fighting and family drama really begins. It went on for years. You see, Fair's will was really specific. It said that if any of his children challenged it, they would get nothing. Zero.
So what did his kids do?
They had a tough choice. Do they accept the will as it is, or risk losing everything by fighting it? And that's just the start of this crazy story. Because with the original will gone, all these people started coming out of the woodwork, everyone claiming they deserved a piece of Fair's fortune. We're talking about his kids, people saying they were his secret wives. Even long-lost relatives popped up.
This is like a real-life soap opera.
Yeah.
With millions of dollars at stake. Who were these people? What were their stories?
Well, one of the most interesting was this woman named Nettie Craven.
Who was she?
She was the principal of the Mission Grammar School. And get this, she said she had a handwritten will from Fair. The newspapers called it the pencil will.
A handwritten will?
Yeah.
That's got to be good evidence, right? Wouldn't that hold up in court?
It wasn't that simple. Handwritten wills were pretty common back then. But proving they were real was a whole other thing. The court had to figure out if the handwriting was actually Fair's, if he was in his right mind when he wrote it, and if anyone had pressured him into writing it.
So it wasn't just about the piece of paper itself. It was about everything surrounding it. Did Craven have any proof to back up her claims? Okay, so we spent the last couple parts of this deep dive looking at the life of James G. Fair, this guy who had all the ups and downs of the Gilded Age.
Yeah, we've seen him go from rags to riches. We've seen how ruthless he could be in business, the scandals, the legal battles after he died. It's quite a story.
It really is. And now that all those court cases are over and the money's been split up, I think we have to ask, who was James G. Fair really? I mean, beyond all the headlines and court documents.
Right. Who was he at his core?
It's easy to get caught up in all the sensational stuff, the missing will, the divorce, all those millions of dollars. But what about the man himself? Was he some kind of visionary? A robber baron? Or somewhere in between?
That's the million-dollar question. And historians are still debating it. You know, like a lot of people from that era, Fair was a man of contradictions.
Okay.
On the one hand, you can't deny he was a brilliant guy. He had this knack for seeing opportunities where everyone else just saw risks, and he was just determined to succeed.
And he did succeed. We've seen it all throughout his life.
Yeah.
From those early days panning for gold to those silver mines in Nevada, he never gave up. He was always looking for the next big thing.
Exactly. And he wasn't afraid to take chances, to push the limits of what was considered ethical business. He was a master negotiator, a marketing whiz, and a competitor who never let up.
But all that drives to win, all that ambition, it came at a price, didn't it? We've seen how his obsession with making money messed up his relationships, broke promises, and really tarnished his reputation.
Oh, for sure. And I think to really get Fair, we need to look at when he lived. That Gilded Age.
Right.
It was a time when things were changing fast. You had this huge gap between the rich and the poor. Everyone was trying to get ahead no matter what.
Fortunes were made and lost overnight. And there weren't many rules to stop people from doing whatever they wanted if they had enough money.
Exactly. Fair was a product of his environment. He thought that for him to win, someone else had to lose.
Like that classic rags to riches story, but taken to the extreme. He fought hard to get to the top, and once he was there, he would do anything to stay there, no matter who got hurt.
Yeah, and that way of thinking affected everything he did. How he dealt with his business rivals, how he acted in the stock market, even his relationships with his own kids. It's like he built this wall around himself, trying to protect his fortune, but losing all those human connections.
And yet with all that, he did some good things too, right?
He did. He donated a lot of money to hospitals, schools, charities in Nevada and California.
It's so weird. The ruthless businessman
Yeah.
who also gives to charity. What do you think? Was he really being generous? Or just trying to make himself look better?
Who knows? It might have been a little of both. But what we can say is that Fair was a complicated guy. He could be incredibly kind or incredibly cruel.
And that's what makes his legacy so complicated too. On the one hand, he was a pioneer. He helped develop the American West, created jobs, built things, helped the economy grow.
Absolutely. But his methods were often shady. He treated people terribly, and a lot of people got hurt in his pursuit of wealth.
So what's the verdict? Was he a good guy or a bad guy? A product of his time, or just an example of what happens when you let ambition take over?
That's the thing about history, isn't it? It's rarely simple. People are complicated, capable of great things and terrible things. And Fair's legacy is definitely messy, full of contradictions and questions we'll never have the answers to.
It's really up to each of us to look at the evidence, think about the time he lived in, and decide for ourselves.
Well said.
Well, on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the life and times of James G. Fair. Was he a visionary or a villain? A product of his time or a cautionary tale for all time? I think it's something worth thinking about. And thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of James G. Fair, the Silver King with a very tarnished crown.